33.9 kilometers of wall, not on land across the open sea. The Yellow Sea fights back with 6 mountain tides twice a day. The current through the construction gap hits speeds that rip 10-ton boulders off the seabed and roll them downstream like gravel. South Korea built through it anyway. 1991, the government announces the largest maritime construction project in Korean history, a continuous wall from the port city of Gunsan to the headland of Byeonsan. 4 dike sections linking 3 island chains, 2 river estuaries blocked. The wall will close off over 1 square kilometers of the Yellow Sea, 2/3 the size of Seoul, 5 times Manhattan. Behind the wall, the Music Sea becomes a lake. The lake becomes land. The land becomes Music a city. 20 billion, 19 years. 100,000 music. Future residents on ground that today is ocean floor. Now, watch what it takes to build a wall in water that does not want one.
I have worked on bridges. I have worked on tunnels. Nothing I have built has tried to destroy itself twice a day.
The first problem is the seabed. It is tidal mud. Unstable sediment deposited over thousands. At low tide, the mud stretches flat and gray to the horizon. At high tide, 6 meters of brown seawater covers it entirely. You cannot place a wall on tidal mud. The sediment liquefies under the load. The tide pulls the tilted section apart before the first course is complete. It swallows. Cutters suction dredgers, anchor offshore and grind the soft mud into slurry. Hundreds of meters of steel pipe chained together on pontoons. The machines work 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. The noise carries for kilometers. The sound of the seabed being eaten alive. In some sections, that layer is 20 mm down, but the trench does not stay open. The current reverses and deposits fresh sediment into the clean trench. If the gravel foundation is not placed before the next tidal cycle buries the clay, 4 times a day, the current drops to near zero for roughly 30 minutes. 3,000 tons of crushed rock each. The southwest coast of Korea is not rock. Soft, saturated, of years by the Mangyong and Dongjin rivers. Soft enough to swallow a man, music to his waist. Nothing visible, nothing solid. The structure tilts. The seabed does not support, so they strip it down to stable clay. Floating factories with rotating cutter heads the size of cars. The slurry is pumped through floating pipelines to disposal areas behind the construction zone. Each dredger removes millions of cubic meters of material per month. The low grinding roar that never stops day or night. The foundation trench must reach competent clay beneath the tidal sediment. 20 ma of unstable muck to remove before a single stone can be placed. The tide fills it back every 6 hours, covering the exposed clay with a blanket of new mud. The dredging must be repeated from zero. The crews operate on tidal windows. Split hull barges loaded with move into position during the slack. Their hulls already splitting open as the current dies. The barge empties in seconds. Miss the window and the returning current hits the barge broadside. 2 barges collided in error, left both in the one grounded on the mudflat, healing until the next tide lifted it free, striking a piling. Every stone must settle within tolerance on the exposed clay. If the bed is uneven by centimeters, the dike develops differential settlement. Seawater enters under pressure. The dike fails from inside. Survey vessels cross and recross the trench in grid patterns. If a section is too high, divers descend to the trench. 6 in of visibility at best. They level the foundation of the longest seawall on Earth with their hands. Divers on their knees in brown water, pushing gravel with their fingers. Now, the dike itself. It is an earth embankment in the open sea. At its widest, the base is 535 meters across. Average width, 290 average height, stretching 33.9 kilometers from shore to shore. You drive across it on a highway at 80 km/h, ocean on both sides. Structure taller than most apartment buildings. The core is sand, sea sand pumped through floating, building up layer by layer behind temporary retaining walls of geotextile tubes, pumped full of sand slurry, flat cloth into solid sausages 2 meters in diameter. 26 kilometers of geotextile tubes across the project, saving 6.2 million in 7 months. If the tube is not pressurized in time,
in brown water, pushing gravel with their fingers. That is how this wall begins.
fabric and the sand core. They dump the entire cargo with one explosive release. Then it pulls out before the current returns. A loaded split hull in a 5-knot tidal stream cannot be steered or stopped. 1998 after a timing channel when the current turned. The other lost its anchor chain and drifted into the construction zone. The gravel bed is the foundation of everything above it. The dike above this bed weighs hundreds of thousands of tons per linear kilometer. Cracks form. The cracks widen invisibly while 401 square kilometers of sea waits behind it. Echo sounders mapping the gravel surface to centimeter accuracy. Floor and rake the stones flat by hand in water so cold, their fingers stop responding after 40 minutes. That is a detail most people miss. That is how this wall begins. This is not a concrete wall. The cross-section looks like a mountain on the seabed. That is wider than 5 football fields. 36 m. Maximum. 54 m. A 17-story building underwater. Only 11 m show above the waterline. The other 25 m are below. And you have no idea you are in the city you just left. Millions of cubic meters of dredged pipelines into the rising structure, giant fabric cylinders, each 30 to 50 mm long, on site until they inflate from. They are stacked in rows to hold the sand core while it drains and consolidates. They replace traditional rock-fill retaining walls. Each tube must be filled and pinned before the tide covers the work zone. The rising tide collapses the unfilled. Behind it slumps into the sea. Around the core, armour. One stone starts the failure. The dike is built in 4 sections. The tide through it stops. By the final stage, construction materials become projectiles. Instead of blocking the gap from one side, every truck dumps a tons, where a loose boulder rolls away the current. On the seaward face, riprap. The cavity undermines the stone above it. The next follows. Each grows from both ends toward the center. As the sections grow and the gaps shrink, exceed 6 meters per second during spring tides. Wire cages filled with rock. The current becomes physically unconstructible. It shallows. The material has a chance to stay. Gabion bags, unlike loose rock, and lock against each other. Drain back without displacing anything. Sea like a road that should not exist. The tide flows through them twice a day. The moment a gap closes, the same 401, the current through the remaining gaps. The remaining gaps carry the full load. June 10th, 2003. The day the northern gap dies. Hundreds of dump trucks line up on the dike crest. The fill even when the current pushes hard. Where a concrete block shifts through the gaps between stones and on the interface on top. But the tide through the remaining gaps does not decrease. Less opening, same volume. Loose rock does not settle. If only one gap stays open, they raise the entire seabed across the full width of the opening simultaneously. The 30-minute pause between tides, they settle, deform under load. Energy by letting water rush up. That stone falls. Headlights move across the surface of the yellow. As long as the gaps remain open, it increases through whatever openings remain. 21 km/h of solid seawater through a channel that shrinks every day. Both southern gaps must close at the same time. Less depth over the sill means less force, each weighing several tons. The bag beside it, The slope absorbs wave. A two-lane highway running the full 33.9 kilometers. At night, the estuary breathes. Watch what happens next. SQkm of water must flow in and out. Gabion baskets. If one gap closes before the others are ready, no cage holds. Combined vertical and horizontal closure. Rock, gravel. The bags hold together because the mesh traps. Each stone placed by crane to interlock with its neighbors. Compacted fill with a clay cap to prevent rainwater from softening the sand core. Island to island, headland to headland. Because this is where the project almost died. It tumbles downstream and disappears. No rock stays. The gap does not narrow. The gabion bags are the breakthrough. They stay. A gently sloped embankment of loose rock. If one stone washes out, but none of this matters until the gaps are closed. The tidal volume stays constant. Faster current, at 6 meters per second, are ripped open by the flow. Zero exceptions. Zero margin. The northern gap closes first as a test. At slack water, wire mesh sacks filled with a mix of rocks and smaller stones. A gabion bag 3 m away holds its ground. Absorbs the load. The mesh is the difference between a wall and a ruin. The sill rises centimeters per tidal cycle. Each cycle is a war. Dump on the slack. Wait. The current returns. Some loose stones roll and disappear. Some bags shift, but enough holds. 1 TD higher than 6 hours ago. Wait for the next slack. Dump again. 1 more centimeter.
Rock by rock. Tide by tide. Not dramatic, just relentless.
The northern gap closes. April 21st, 2006. The day the sea loses. Rushes through the single remaining gap. Bulldozers idle at the edge. Adjustments, 5 m per second. Gabion bags tumbling after. The current fights back. Lock against the seabed and each other. Material that settled on the seaward face is pushed from behind. More bags, the sill rises again. Move the stone size being used. The Semanjum estuary is separated from the ocean. If a typhoon strikes before the riprap armour is complete, the angle is 1.3. Steeper and the stones slide under weight loading. The water exchange between if both systems fail during a storm, inside rises uncontrollably. Now the final battle. 2 construction fronts. The entire tidal volume of 401 square kilometers. Convoys of dump trucks stretch back along both dike crests. Speed in real time and radioing. The tide drops. Hundreds of trucks dump at once. Bulldozers pushing material off the crest. The water erupts, but the gabion bags hold. The tide turns. The bags absorb the reversal. Tidal current can no longer. The crews raise both sills above the high tide line. The current drops to zero. But the wall is closed. The waves tear the exposed sand core apart. The sand liquefies. Each boulder lowered by crane fitted into the interlocking slope. Massive steel structures controlling. Fresh water from the Mangyong and Dongjin rivers accumulates inside. The water that used to flow through 3 openings now squeezes through 2, each 2.7 kilometer wide. If one closes first, the operation starts at dawn. Engineers on survey boats measuring current, the signal goes to both fronts at the same moment. Cranes lowering 5-ton concrete blocks on steel cables into the flow. Individual rocks tumble. They settle, deform, and the sill rises. The current reverses direction. The sill holds. More trucks. Sills has decreased enough that everything stays. Water stops flowing. Not finished. Typhoons hit the Korean west coast every summer. The core collapses. The riprap goes on stone by stone. 2 sluice gate systems. Sins and Garyu are installed in the southern section. Gates open, seawater enters gates close. Surge the water level. The current through the two remaining southern gaps immediately increases. Two gaps. Both must close on the same day. The current in that gap exceeds any constructible resistance. Mobile cranes on barges in the channels. For 3, the slack approaches, rock cascading over the edge into churning brown water. It grabs the dump material and tries to drag it through. Both gaps under attack from the inside. Next slack. By evening, the water depth over both. The critical velocity threshold is crossed. Over the following days, for the first time in geological history, storm surges raise the water level by 3 mm in a single hour. 401 square kilometers of retained water at back through the breach. Shallower and waves overtop the crest and attack the interface. Enclosed area and the sea. The dike is designed for pressure from one side only. The sand core liquefies from within. The gates must work every time, in every storm forever. 19 years after groundbreaking, President Lee Myung-bak calls it the world record certifies Earth 33.9 km, 500, that held the record for 78 years, 54 meters tall at the deepest, 401 square kilometers enclosed, 20 billion for the full development, industrial zones, a new city plan for residents by 2050. 2. 3 environmental lawsuits, 1 change of government, and still it went up. Earth movers build rectangular polder dikes inside the enclosed area. Dredgers fill the drained space with sand. The mud becomes soil. The foundation becomes roads, utilities, factory floors. Traffic lights stand where the tide turned. Hyundai Motor Group has signed a $6.1 billion investment to build an AI on ground that was tidal seabed 30 years ago. The Saemangjiam estuary was one of Asia, 300,000 and migratory shorebirds every year. The migration route from breeding, Alaska to wintering grounds in, birds that fly 10,000. Saemangjiam was that place. The tide that fed them stopped. The invertebrates that lived in the wet sediment perished. Shorebird populations during northward migration. The great knot declined by 93%. The spoonbill sandpiper, fewer than 500 left on Earth. Satellite tracking showed that most species had no alternative staging site, enough food to sustain it. They did not relocate. One wall, 300,000 birds. Simultaneous pressure from both sides exceeds the structural capacity. The wall ceases to exist. April 27, 2010. The wall opens officially. 2 decades of construction in the open sea. Great Wall on the Sea. Guinness. It has the longest man-made seawall on, longer than the Dutch Afsluitdijk, 290 meter wide. 2 invisible beneath the surface. 2.6 billion music for wall. Land reclamation, infrastructure, 700,000. Supreme Court challenges, 2 court-ordered shutdowns. Behind the wall, the transformation begins. Pumps remove the trapped seawater. Grass is planted to pull moisture from the new surface and harden it. The soil becomes foundation. Streets appear where fish swam. 28% complete as of today. Data center and autonomous vehicle testing complex on the reclaimed land. But the wall carries a cost that no budget line covers. The most important tidal flat ecosystems in East. Square kilometers of mudflats supporting between 570,000. A critical refueling stop on the East Asian-Australasian flyway. Grounds in Siberia and Australia and New Zealand. Kilometers without stopping, need one place to eat. When the wall closed in 2006, the tidal flats died. The mud dried. The food supply vanished. Saemangjiam dropped by 95%. 97% during southward migration. The red knot by 97%. Lost one of its last viable refueling sites. Nowhere else on the route with 10,000-kilometer flight, they disappeared. The fishers lost their livelihood too. Between 20,000 and 30,000 people had worked the same estuary for generations. Shellfish beds, fish spawning grounds, seaweed farms, gone the day the tide stopped flowing. Compensation was offered. It was not enough. It is never enough when the sea you fished your whole life becomes a construction site, not a triumph. A transaction, land for sea, city for estuary, economy for ecology. The wall stands. The city rises behind it. The mud dries into soil. The roads extend across ground that was ocean floor within living memory. And twice a day the yellow sea presses 6 anners of tide against the outer face and waits. Not a wall against the sea, a lease on the sea, 33.9 kilometer long, signed in rock and gabions in the silence of 300,000 birds. Renewable only by maintenance, the sea does not forget.